The first thing people noticed about Elijah Monroe was his voice, not his height, though he was tall enough to fill a doorframe, not his face, though it was the kind that made strangers feel they had met him before. It was the voice, low, steady, and unhurried, the kind that could make a grieving widow feel held or make a restless congregation lean forward in their pews. In Atlanta's West Side Baptist communities, a good preacher's voice was currency. Elijah Monroe was a wealthy man. He had pastored Refuge Church of the Redeemed for 6 years, since he was 29 years old, taking over from Elder Thomas Greer, who had led the congregation for 3 decades before his health declined. The church sat on Cascade Road, a brick building surrounded by oak trees that turned copper every October. On good Sundays, and most Sundays were good, the sanctuary held close to 400 people. Families dressed in their best, children who ran down the aisles after service looking for candy from the deacons. Old women who wore white gloves and wept quietly during the praise portion, not from sadness, but from something the younger members were still learning to feel. Elijah had grown up 2 miles away, in a house his mother still lived in. She had raised him and his younger sister alone after their father left when Elijah was 11. She worked double shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital for years, and on Sundays, she sat in the 3rd pew from the front at whatever church would have them. Faith was not decoration in the Monroe household. It was infrastructure. He graduated from Morehouse, then attended Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. 4 years on the West Coast, away from everyone who knew him. He came back to Atlanta in his late 20s with a theology degree, a disciplined mind, and a version of himself that felt, to him, carefully assembled. The elders at Refuge saw a young man of obvious ability and rare self-possession. They gave him the pulpit. He gave them everything they hoped for. By the time he was 34, Elijah Monroe was considered one of the most promising young pastors on the West Side. He preached with structure and fire in equal measure. He counseled couples. He visited the sick. He drove to county jail on the 3rd Saturday of every month to lead a Bible study for incarcerated men. He was, by every visible measure, exactly what he appeared to be. Naomi Carter entered his life on a Tuesday evening in the spring of his 5th year at Refuge. She had come to a grief support group the church hosted following the death of her older brother. She was 31, a pediatric occupational therapist with a quiet authority about her, the kind of person who listened before she spoke and meant it when she did. She had natural hair, wore simple jewelry, and laughed in a way that surprised people who had just met her, unexpectedly full and warm. Elijah was not supposed to be there that evening. He had stopped in briefly to greet the facilitator and stayed longer than he intended. Naomi sat across the room and said little during the group discussion, but when she did speak, her words were precise and unguarded in a way that made people around her exhale. He introduced himself afterward. She already knew who he was. She had attended Refuge twice before with a friend. They talked for 20 minutes in the church hallway under fluorescent lights, and when he got to his car, he sat for a moment before starting the engine. Over the next year, their relationship developed with the kind of measured pace that felt right for both of them. Coffee that stretched into long dinners, walks through Cascade Springs Park, long phone calls that ran past midnight. He met her parents in Charlotte. She met his mother. Elijah's congregation noticed the change in him, a softening, a lightness. Sister Greer, the elder's widow, told anyone who would listen that the pastor needed a good woman and that Naomi Carter looked like exactly that. He proposed on a Saturday morning in November, on the hiking trail at Stone Mountain. He had rehearsed it. He said the right things. She cried, then laughed, then cried again and said yes, before he even finished asking. The wedding was set for the following September, a full ceremony at Refuge, reception in the adjacent fellowship hall, 10 months to plan. Naomi threw herself into it with focused joy. She had a vision for the day, ivory and sage green, natural flowers, a live string quartet for the ceremony, a DJ for the reception. She wanted it to feel elegant, but not stiff. warm, real. Elijah was attentive through every planning conversation. He showed up to venue walkthroughs, tasted the food with honest opinions, approved the centerpieces. He was the groom who was actually present, and Naomi told her mother this was one of the things she loved about him. That he was not just tolerating the process, that he seemed to genuinely want the day to be beautiful. But there were moments, small, easily explained, easily dismissed. A Sunday afternoon when she dropped by his apartment unannounced, and he answered the door with his phone pressed against his chest, already locked. He laughed it off, said he had been in the middle of a call with a church member going through a difficult stretch. She believed him. There was no reason not to. A name that appeared once in conversation, mentioned by one of Elijah's seminary friends at a birthday dinner, Caleb, just the name, and then Elijah's expression. Not guilt exactly, but a stillness that passed so quickly she was not sure she had seen it. She did not ask. The moment dissolved into the next course and the next conversation. A night when she reached for his hand in bed and felt him already somewhere else, his body present and his mind completely gone. She asked if he was all right. He said he was tired. She let it go. These were not alarms. They were the ordinary friction of two adults building a shared life, the small gaps that form when two people have not yet learned all of each other. Naomi had her own distances, her own corners she had not yet opened fully. She did not require perfection. She required honesty. That was the thing she told her best friend, Dara, over brunch one Sunday in March, 6 months before the wedding. She was not looking for a flawless man. She was looking for a real one. A man who would tell her the hard things rather than protect her from them. A man who understood that a marriage built on full truth, even uncomfortable truth, was stronger than one built on comfort alone. Dara raised her orange juice. "To a real man," she said. Naomi smiled and raised her glass. She had no way of knowing that the realest thing about Elijah Monroe was the one thing he had spent the last 4 years making sure she would never find out. Fuller Theological Seminary sat in the foothills of Pasadena, California, surrounded by mountains that turned purple at dusk and streets lined with jacaranda trees that bloomed violet every spring. For a young man from Atlanta who had never lived more than 30 miles from the house he grew up in, the West Coast felt like a different country. Looser, quieter, less watched. Elijah arrived in September of his first year, carrying 2 suitcases, a study Bible his mother had pressed into his hands at the airport, and the absolute certainty that God had a specific plan for his life. He was 23 years old. He believed in that plan the way he believed in gravity, not because he had examined it carefully, but because the alternative was a kind of freefall he could not afford to imagine. He met Caleb Whitmore during orientation week. Caleb was from Memphis, the son of a Church of God in Christ minister, and he carried that background visibly, in his posture, in the measured way he chose words, in the slight formality he wore like a second skin in public. He was 24, 1 year older than Elijah, with a lean build and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He was studying pastoral theology on a full scholarship. He was, by his own admission, the most serious person he knew. What struck Elijah first was not charm. Caleb was not charming in any conventional sense. What struck him was the quality of Caleb's attention, the way he listened during their first real conversation, as if every word Elijah said was load-bearing, as if he was building something in real time from what he heard. It was disarming. Elijah was used to being the one who made people feel seen. He was not used to feeling it himself. They became study partners before they became friends. Long sessions in the seminary library, trading commentary notes on the Pauline epistles, arguing about hermeneutics with the low-grade intensity of people who found that kind of argument genuinely pleasurable. Elijah was sharper on the rhetorical side. Caleb was more careful with the original languages. His Greek was precise, his Hebrew workable. They balanced each other in a way that felt efficient at first, and then began to feel like something else. By the middle of their second year, they were spending most of their free time together. Weekend drives up the Angeles Crest Highway. Saturday mornings at a coffee shop on Lake Avenue that opened at 6. Late nights on the seminary's rooftop terrace, talking about theology and fathers and what they were afraid of. It was on that rooftop, in early December of their second year, that something shifted between them in a way neither of them immediately named. Caleb had been talking about his father, about the pressure of being a minister's son, about performing faith before he had actually found it, about the gap between the person his family believed him to be and whoever he suspected he actually was. He said it plainly, without drama, the way people sometimes say the most honest things, as if the honesty itself has worn them out and there is nothing left to do but release it. Elijah said quietly that he understood exactly what that felt like. The silence that followed was different from other silences. It had weight, texture. He did not let himself think about what it meant that night. He walked back to his room, opened his Bible to a passage he had read 100 times, and prayed with the focused desperation of someone trying to outrun a conclusion they have already reached. It did not work. It never worked. But he tried for weeks before he stopped trying. What began between them was not reckless. That was the part Elijah could never fully explain to himself later, when explanation felt necessary. It was not a moment of weakness or a loss of control. It was slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly clear. They both knew what it was. They both knew what their faith said about what it was. They talked about that too. In the same careful way they talked about everything, and then they made a choice that neither of them pretended was accidental. For 2.5 years, they were together in the way two people are together, when the relationship is real and the world cannot know it exists. They were not naive about what they were risking. They were discreet by instinct and necessity. Within the seminary walls, they were colleagues, study partners, close friends. Outside those walls, driving up into the mountains or in the quiet of one of their apartments on a Sunday afternoon when everyone else was at church, they were something the seminary had no category for. Caleb was the first person who had ever known Elijah completely, not the version Elijah curated for congregations or family dinners or ministry interviews. The full version, uncertain, contradictory, deeply afraid, and underneath the fear, genuinely alive in a way he had not expected to be. Caleb knew that version and did not ask him to exchange it for a safer one. That was, in the end, why the ending was so clean and so devastating. It came in the spring of their final year, 3 months before graduation. Elijah received the call from Atlanta. Elder Greer's health had declined sharply, and the Board of Refugee was in quiet conversation about succession. Elijah's name was at the top of every list. It was the thing he had been preparing for, the thing his mother had been praying for, the fulfillment of the promise he had made to God before he even knew what the promise would cost. He told Caleb on a Wednesday evening, sitting in Caleb's apartment with the windows open and the sound of Pasadena traffic drifting in from outside. "I have to go back," Elijah said, "and I have to go back as who they think I am." Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "And who do they think you are?" "You know the answer to that. I want to hear you say it." Elijah could not say it. He sat with the silence instead, and the silence said everything. Caleb did not shout. He did not beg. He was, to the end, the most composed person Elijah had ever known. He said that he understood. He said that he disagreed, completely and without reservation, but that he understood. He said that choosing a lie over a life was a decision Elijah would carry for a long time, and that he hoped, genuinely hoped, that Elijah would one day be willing to put it down. They did not speak again after graduation. Elijah drove to LAX alone on a June morning, boarded a Delta flight to Atlanta, and landed in the city where everyone already knew exactly who he was. His mother picked him up. She held his face in her hands at the arrivals gate and told him she was proud of him. He smiled and said he was home. He had not thought about Caleb in months. That was what he told himself. He had learned to be very convincing, especially with himself. But there are things a person knows without thinking about them, the way a scar remembers a wound, even when the pain has faded. Caleb Whitmore was that kind of knowledge. Present without being summoned. Quiet, but never entirely gone. And 4 years later, sitting in his office at Refuge, reviewing wedding seating arrangements on a Tuesday afternoon in April, Elijah's phone lit up with a number he did not recognize, a Memphis area code. And he felt, before he even read the message, the specific cold certainty of something long buried beginning to surface. He set the phone face down on his desk. He opened his laptop and returned to the seating chart. He did not call back. The Memphis number called again on a Thursday. Elijah was in the middle of a premarital counseling session with a young couple from the congregation. Deshawn and Brittany, 26 and 24, nervous in the way people are when they are about to make the largest promise of their lives and have only just begun to understand its dimensions. He was walking them through conflict resolution, through the difference between winning an argument and protecting a marriage, through the discipline of choosing honesty even when silence felt safer. His phone was face down on the corner of his desk. He did not look at it. After the session ended, and the couple left with their workbooks and their interlaced fingers, he sat alone in his office and stared at the phone for a full minute before picking it up. The call had gone to voicemail. He did not listen to it immediately. He set the phone in his desk drawer, locked it, and drove to Naomi's apartment for dinner. She had cooked. Roasted chicken, rice, a salad she had dressed herself with lemon and olive oil. She was telling him about a patient, a 6-year-old boy who had made a breakthrough that week, who had managed for the first time to button his own shirt without assistance. Her face carried the specific satisfaction of someone whose work meant something. And Elijah watched her talk and felt the ordinary warmth of the life he had constructed and the quiet dread of everything underneath it. He listened to the voicemail at midnight, parked outside his apartment building, engine off. Elijah, it's Caleb. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I'm not calling to cause problems. I saw the announcement, the wedding. I needed to reach out once, just once, and if you don't respond, I'll respect that. But I think you should know that I'm not the same person I was in Pasadena. I've done a lot of work. I've had to. And part of that work means I can't watch you do this to yourself or to her without saying something. Call me back, please. The message was 2 minutes and 14 seconds long. Elijah played it once, then he deleted it. He told himself that was the end of it. Caleb Whitmore had not stayed still in the 4 years since Fuller. He had returned to Memphis, worked briefly at his father's church in an administrative role, and then left, quietly, without drama, when it became clear that the version of himself he was becoming had no room in the building his father had constructed. He moved to Nashville, got a job as a program coordinator at a nonprofit that served transitional housing residents, and began the slow, difficult work of rebuilding himself outside the architecture of the faith that had shaped him. He went to therapy. He joined a support community for gay men of faith, most of whom were black, most of whom had grown up in the same specific ecosystem of expectation and silence that he had. He learned, gradually and at significant cost, to hold his spirituality and his identity in the same hands without one crushing the other. He had dated. Nothing that lasted longer than 8 months, nothing that reached the depth of what he had shared with Elijah, but genuine, honest in a way his life in seminary had never been able to be. When the announcement appeared on Refuge Church's social media page in November, Pastor Elijah Monroe and Naomi Carter, photograph and everything, the engagement ring catching the light at Stone Mountain, Caleb had stared at the screen for a long time without moving. He did not feel what he expected to feel. It was not jealousy exactly. It was something older and heavier, a grief that did not belong to him but arrived anyway. He thought about Naomi Carter, whose name he did not yet know, but whose face in the photograph was open and radiant and entirely unguarded. He thought about what she was walking into without knowing it. He thought about what Elijah was building on ground that would not hold. He waited 3 months before calling. He wanted to be certain he was not acting from anger. He wanted to be sure that what he was feeling was concern and not the desire to disturb something simply because it hurt him to see it standing. When Elijah did not call back, Caleb called again. When that call went unanswered, he sent a text. Brief. Direct. I'm not going away, Elijah, not because I want to hurt you, because I don't think you understand how this ends. Elijah read the text on a Sunday morning, standing in the vestibule of Refuge in his pastoral robe, 20 minutes before the service began. His hands were steady. His face showed nothing. He put the phone in his robe pocket and walked into the sanctuary and preached for 45 minutes on the liberation that comes from living without concealment. He did not detect the irony consciously, or perhaps he did, and had learned to preach through it. The months leading up to the wedding moved with the particular acceleration that precedes significant events. Naomi finalized the florals: garden roses, eucalyptus, white ranunculus. The string quartet confirmed. The caterer was locked in. Her dress, a silk crepe gown with a modest neckline and a long train, had been fitted twice and needed only one final adjustment. Elijah's best man was Marcus Webb, his closest friend since childhood, who had stood by him through his mother's illness scare, through the early, uncertain years at Refuge, through everything Elijah had allowed anyone to stand by him through. Marcus gave a toast at the rehearsal dinner that made the room laugh, and then go quiet with something that felt like reverence. He spoke about Elijah's character, his consistency, his commitment to doing right by the people who depended on him. Every word was genuinely meant. Marcus had no idea how much weight those words were carrying. Caleb drove to Atlanta in July. He did not contact Elijah first. He spent 2 days in the city, walked past Cascade Road, sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks from Refuge, watched the neighborhood move around the church that had become the center of Elijah's constructed life. He was not planning anything specific yet. He was still hoping that proximity, that the simple reality of being close, would prompt something. A call, a meeting, some acknowledgement that what was happening was real and that someone in it knew the full truth. Nothing came. On his second evening in Atlanta, sitting in his hotel room with his laptop open, Caleb made a decision he had been circling for weeks. He opened a folder he had kept since seminary. Photographs, screenshots of messages, a short video recorded carelessly one afternoon in Pasadena, both of them visible, the date embedded in the file metadata. He had not kept these things as weapons. He had kept them because they were evidence that something real had existed, that he had not imagined it, that the years in California had been inhabited by 2 actual people who had actually loved each other. But sitting alone in an Atlanta hotel room with the wedding 8 weeks away, he looked at what he had and understood for the first time that it was also something else. He closed the laptop without doing anything. He drove back to Nashville the following morning. For 3 weeks, he did not act. He went to therapy. He talked it through. His therapist, a careful woman named Dr. Renee Holt, asked him the same question in different forms across multiple sessions. What is the outcome you actually want from this? Not the outcome you can justify, the one you want. He wanted Elijah to stop. He wanted Naomi to know. He wanted the lie to end before it became a marriage, before it became a life, before 2 more people spent years inside something hollow. He also wanted, somewhere beneath all of that and harder to admit, for Elijah to look directly at what they had been and call it by its real name. Just once, in front of no one but himself. 3 weeks before the wedding, with no response to any message and no sign that Elijah intended to move differently, Caleb opened his laptop again. This time, he did not close it. He began to plan. The morning of September 13th arrived the way significant days often do. Ordinary on the surface, the sky a pale, unremarkable blue over Atlanta's west side, the temperature already climbing before 8 o'clock. Naomi woke in her apartment surrounded by her bridesmaids. Her mother, Patricia, had flown in from Charlotte 2 days earlier and was already in the kitchen when Naomi emerged, making the sweet potato biscuits she had been making every important morning of Naomi's life. The smell reached the bedroom before anything else. For a moment, Naomi simply stood in the hallway and let herself feel it, the fullness of the day, the weight of it, the joy. Her dress hung on the back of the closet door. Ivory silk, long train, simple and exact. The florist had delivered the bridal bouquet at 9, garden roses and white ranunculus wrapped in sage ribbon. Everything was as she had planned. Everything felt right. Across the city, Elijah dressed in his childhood bedroom. His mother had insisted he spend the night at her house. Tradition, she said. Superstition. Luck. His suit was charcoal with an ivory pocket square to match Naomi's colors. Marcus arrived at 10 to help with the cuffs and the tie, and the particular nervous energy that Elijah was managing with the focused calm he applied to everything. "You good?" Marcus asked, studying him in the mirror. "I'm good," Elijah said. And in one sense, he meant it completely. The day was real. Naomi was real. The life they were building had genuine substance. He had convinced himself, with the thoroughness that comes from years of practice, that love did not require a single kind of truth. That what he felt for Naomi, which was real, was sufficient to carry what he could not say, which was also real. He had not heard from Caleb in 3 weeks. The silence had steadied him. He had chosen to read it as acceptance. He was wrong. Caleb had arrived in Atlanta the previous afternoon. He checked into a motel on the south side under his own name, paying cash for 2 nights. He had driven from Nashville with the USB drive in his jacket pocket and a plan that he had revised and second-guessed and returned to across 4 therapy sessions and 3 sleepless weeks. Dr. Holt had not approved. She had been careful not to tell him what to do. That was not her role. But she had asked, in their final session before he drove south, whether he had considered that the person most harmed by a public exposure would not be Elijah. "Naomi doesn't know you," she said. "To her, you will be the man who destroyed her wedding day. Is that who you want to be in this story?" He did not have a clean answer. He drove to Atlanta anyway. The ceremony at Refuge Church of the Redeemed began at noon. The sanctuary was full. Nearly 400 people in their finest, the air carrying perfume and expectation and the low murmur of an occasion. The string quartet played from the front corner, something classical and unhurried. The flower arrangements ran along every pew end, sage and ivory and white. Everything Naomi had chosen with the kind of deliberate care she applied to things that mattered. Caleb entered through the side door at 11:45. He wore a dark suit, carried no invitation, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew how to occupy a space without drawing attention. He had attended enough church services to know how to look like he belonged. He sat in the second-to-last row on the left side. He watched the groomsmen enter. He watched Marcus Webb take his position. He watched Elijah walk to the altar. He looked, from that distance, exactly like a man who had built the life he wanted. The bride's entrance silenced the room in the way it always does, not dramatically but completely, as if the air itself paused. Naomi appeared at the back of the sanctuary on her father's arm, and the congregation rose. She moved down the aisle with her eyes fixed on Elijah, and her expression was not performance. It was the real face of a woman who believed entirely in the moment she was standing inside. Caleb looked at his lap. The vows were written personally. Elijah's voice did not waver. He spoke about Naomi's patience, her strength, her ability to make him feel anchored. He promised fidelity. He promised honesty. He said the word honest, and the congregation responded with soft affirmations. And Caleb, in the second-to-last row, pressed his thumbnail into his palm until it left a mark. They were pronounced married at 12:47. The reception moved to the fellowship hall at 1:30. Round tables, ivory linens, sage candles, the smell of the catered food warm and rich in the enclosed space. A DJ set up in the far corner. At the front of the room, a projection screen awaited the wedding slideshow, photographs of Elijah and Naomi from their courtship, from the engagement, from the life they had documented together. Caleb had entered the fellowship hall during the gap between ceremony and reception, while the room was still being arranged and attended only by catering staff, moving between the kitchen and the tables. He had identified the AV setup during his visit to Atlanta in July. The projector connected wirelessly to a presentation laptop positioned on a table near the DJ booth. The network was the church's general Wi-Fi, unsecured, the password printed on a laminated card at the welcome desk. It took him 9 minutes. He uploaded the video, set it to override the slideshow file, and configured it to play automatically when the presentation opened. Then, he closed his laptop, put it in his bag, and sat at a table near the back with a glass of water and the particular stillness of someone who has passed the point of reversing course. At 3:15, the DJ took the microphone. He introduced the slideshow with the warmth of someone who had done this at dozens of receptions. The lights dimmed, the projector activated. For 3 seconds, the screen showed the correct image. Elijah and Naomi at Stone Mountain, laughing, the ring catching the light. Then the file switched. The room processed what it was seeing in stages. First confusion, the image did not compute, did not belong. Then recognition, sharp and terrible, moving through the crowd like a current. 2 men, a Pasadena apartment. A date stamp from 6 years ago. Elijah's face, unmistakable. Naomi stood at the head table with her hand raised toward her mouth. Someone in the middle of the room said loudly what everyone was thinking. The DJ cut the feed 30 seconds in, but 30 seconds had been enough. Every person in that room had seen what they had seen, and seeing it could not be undone. Elijah crossed the floor in 6 strides and reached Naomi before her bridesmaids did. He said her name. She looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before and hoped never to see again. Not rage, not grief, but the specific devastation of total revision, of watching everything she thought she understood rearrange itself into something unrecognizable. She said his name back, just once, a question and a verdict at the same time. And Elijah Monroe, who had built his entire adult life on the management of a single truth, had nothing left to say. The fellowship hall emptied in under 20 minutes. Not all at once. There was no organized exodus. It happened the way crowds dissolve after something catastrophic, in small clusters. People gathering their things with the careful movements of those who do not want to be seen responding too visibly to what they have just witnessed. Some left without speaking to anyone. Some stood in the parking lot in groups of 3 and 4, voices low, phones already out. Naomi was escorted to a side room by her mother and her maid of honor, Dara. She did not cry immediately. She sat on a folding chair in a room used for children's Sunday school, still in her wedding dress, her bouquet on the table beside her. And she was very still. Her mother held her hand. Dara stood near the door as if guarding something. What Naomi felt in those first minutes was not grief. It was the specific vertigo of rereading, going back through every conversation, every evening, every moment she had accepted without question, and understanding now what had been present in each of them that she had not been equipped to see. It was not stupidity. It was trust. She had trusted completely, and the realization that the trust had been placed in a performance rather than a person made the ground feel unreliable in a way that had nothing to do with the building she was sitting in. She asked her mother to leave her alone for 10 minutes. Patricia Carter looked at her daughter for a long moment, then nodded and stepped out. Naomi sat in the Sunday school room with crayon drawings on the walls and small plastic chairs stacked in the corner, and she allowed herself to feel the full weight of it without managing it for anyone else's comfort. Then she stood up, smoothed the front of her dress, and walked back into the hallway. Elijah was there. He had been waiting. The church elders had cleared the immediate area. Marcus stood 10 feet away, not close enough to hear, not far enough to feel like he had abandoned his position. Elijah looked like a man standing in the aftermath of something he had caused and could not undo. Which was exactly what he was. Naomi spoke first. "How long?" she said. Not how long had he known, not how long had it been going on, just how long, because the question contained everything. "Since seminary," he said. She absorbed that. 4 years before he met her. The entire construction of their relationship built over a foundation he had laid before she existed in his life. She asked if he had loved her. He said yes, and she believed him, and that made it worse rather than better, because it confirmed that what he had done was not the result of indifference. It was the result of a decision. Deliberate, sustained, repeated every day for 2 years. He had chosen this. He had chosen her as the instrument of a particular kind of disappearance, and he had done it while meaning well, which was perhaps the most disorienting part of all. She told him she needed him to leave. He left. Detective Sandra Okafor from the Atlanta Police Department arrived at Refuge Church at 4:45, called by the church's administrative elder, who was uncertain what crime had been committed, but certain that something had. She was methodical and unhurried. She interviewed the DJ first, who showed her his equipment log and confirmed the override had been executed remotely. She interviewed 3 members of the catering staff who had been in the hall during the setup window. One of them, a young woman working her second event for the company, remembered a man in a dark suit near the AV table during the pre-reception gap. She described him with enough precision to be useful. Elijah met with Detective Okafor at 5:30 in his office. He gave her Caleb's name within the first 10 minutes. He did not hesitate. Whatever complicated geography existed between him and Caleb, he was past the point of protecting the distance. Okafor located Caleb's motel registration by 7 that evening. She drove there directly. He opened the door when she knocked, as if he had been expecting her, which he had. He was still in his suit. He had not eaten. He confirmed everything she needed to confirm before she asked the second question. She told him the potential charges: unauthorized computer access, intentional infliction of emotional distress. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said only, "I know what I did. I knew it when I did it." She studied him for a moment, the steadiness of him, the absence of panic, and told him not to leave the city. He said he wouldn't. He meant it. The church board convened an emergency session at 8 o'clock. Elijah attended. He sat at a conference table with 6 men who had trusted him with the most consequential responsibility they had to offer, and he told them the truth, all of it, without omission, for the first time in his adult life. It took 40 minutes. The room was very quiet throughout. Elder Thomas Greer's widow, who was not a board member but had been called by her son, who was, came to the door of the conference room before the vote and looked at Elijah for a long moment without speaking. Then she turned and walked back down the hallway, and the sound of her footsteps was the loneliest sound in the building. The vote was unanimous. Elijah drove to his mother's house at 10:15. She was awake. She had heard. He sat at her kitchen table and she made coffee. She knew neither of them would drink, and she put her hand on top of his and said nothing at all, which was the only thing left to say. A year moves differently after a rupture. It does not slow exactly, but it becomes more visible, each month distinct in a way that ordinary time rarely is. marked by the specific work of people rebuilding themselves from materials they did not choose. Naomi Carter left Atlanta in October, 5 weeks after the wedding. She gave notice at her clinic, packed what fit in her car, and drove back to Charlotte without a forwarding announcement. She did not disappear. She called her friends, answered her mother's daily check-ins, maintained the surface functions of a life in motion. But she needed to be somewhere that did not carry the specific weight of every street corner she had shared with a man she was still in the process of understanding she had never fully known. She started therapy in November with a woman named Dr. Angela Reeves, who specialized in relational trauma. The early sessions were difficult in the way excavation is difficult, necessary, unglamorous, producing more mess before producing clarity. Naomi worked through the inventory of what had been real and what had been constructed, and she learned, slowly, to hold both without collapsing one into the other. Some of it had been genuine. His care for her, his attention, his presence in the ordinary moments of their life together. She did not revise those into lies simply because they had been incomplete. Incompleteness was not the same as fabrication. She was learning to make that distinction and to understand that making it did not require her to minimize what had been done to her. By spring, she was sleeping without interruption. By summer, she was laughing without catching herself. She returned to pediatric therapy work at a practice in Charlotte and found, unexpectedly, that her capacity for the work had deepened. Something about having moved through a fundamental disorientation made her more present with the children who sat across from her, more patient with the ones who could not yet find the words for what they were carrying, more certain that the words would come eventually if the space was safe enough to hold them. She did not begin dating again within the year. She was not ready, and she was honest about not being ready, which felt like its own form of progress. Elijah spent the first month at his mother's house and then moved into a studio apartment in the West End. Small, functional, stripped of the symbols of the life he had inhabited before. He started seeing a therapist named Dr. Jerome Banks, a black man in his 50s, who had spent 30 years working specifically with men navigating the intersection of faith, identity, and the damage caused by long-term concealment. The sessions were not comfortable. Dr. Banks did not offer comfort as the primary product. He offered clarity, and clarity at that stage required Elijah to sit with things he had spent a decade learning to stand up from. He came out publicly in January, not with a statement or a press release, but in a conversation with a reporter from an Atlanta LGBTQ publication who had reached out after the story circulated. The interview ran 1,500 words. He did not perform contrition or redemption. He simply told the truth in sequence, including the parts that reflected poorly on him, and let it stand without editorializing. The response was what it was. Some people extended grace immediately. Others did not. And he understood why, and he did not contest it. He found a small, affirming congregation on the city's east side that met in a renovated warehouse on Sunday evenings. He was not their pastor. He sat in the back and participated in the ordinary way, and the ordinariness of it. Belonging without leading, receiving without performing, was something he had not understood he needed until he was inside it. By summer, he was volunteering 2 evenings a week at a center for LGBTQ youth. Many of them from religious households, most of them carrying the particular damage of having been told that who they were was incompatible with being loved. He was good at the work. He understood the interior geography of it from the inside. He did not contact Naomi. He had written a letter in December, handwritten, 4 pages, and then decided not to send it. What it contained was true and thoroughly meant, but she had not asked for it, and the decision of whether to receive it was hers to make, not his to impose. He held on to it in case she ever asked. She did not, within that year, and he respected the silence as information. The charges against Caleb were filed in October and reduced in February following Elijah's meeting with the prosecutor's office. a meeting he had requested himself, without Naomi's prompting, because he had arrived at the same conclusion independently. Caleb had caused real harm. But the architecture of the harm had been built by Elijah, and he was not willing to allow the legal system to assign the weight of it incorrectly. The charges were dropped in March. Caleb returned to Nashville and continued the work he had been doing before Atlanta: the housing nonprofit, the therapy, the gradual construction of a life that did not require concealment as a structural element. He sent Naomi a letter in January. She received it, read it twice, and placed it in a drawer. She was not ready to respond, and she did not pretend otherwise. He sent Elijah nothing. There was nothing left to send. What had needed saying had been said through the worst possible method, and what remained between them now was not animosity. It was the quiet aftermath of two people who had once known each other completely and now existed as footnotes in each other's ongoing stories. By the following September, 1 year to the day, all three of them were standing inside lives that were genuinely their own, harder than the lives they had planned, more honest than the lives they had been living. That, in the end, was the only resolution available. Not justice in the clean sense, not healing that erased what had happened. Simply three people moving forward in truth, carrying what could not be put down, and learning day by day to carry it without being buried by it. The truth had come out on a September afternoon in a fellowship hall in Atlanta's West Side. It had cost everything. It had also, eventually, built something that could hold.